Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad podcast with Chris Finn, a production of P4S Golf. Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. I'm your host, Chris Finn. I'm excited today to have a good friend of mine that I've known for quite a while in the golf fitness space, Jonathan Avalos. He is the owner of Athletic Golf Fitness and one of the probably earlier golf fitness, I would call friends that I had. People didn't talk to me before, and then now Jonathan and I kind of we hit it off. We were similar spots kind of early in the business and trying to figure out how the heck do we make a living doing what we love. And Jonathan, I got to tell you, it's an honor to have you on the show, man. And just honestly, everyone listening, turn the volume up because this guy knows his stuff, and it's going to be an awesome time that we have together. So Jonathan, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Chris. I've learned a lot from you. So, I mean, I'm happy to be here. Honestly, it's a really privilege. It's a real privilege, to sit down and just kind of have a conversation with you. I know both of us are pretty busy, but anytime I can talk to you, I mean, I'll make time for it. So happy to be here.
Yeah, sure, man. I feel the same way. So I know we were, kind of going back and forth what we wanted to talk about. It's a new year. I think, a lot of the conversation, this is my favorite time of year, honestly, to go to the gym. And I guess it's kind of a funny / negative way. I love going to the gym just a general gym the first 3-4 weeks of the year, and just walking on the treadmill and watching the ridiculousness that is New Year, people who come into the gym trying and some of the stuff you see is like, oh, I wonder what TikTok channel that came off of. But I think one of the big things that is important is goal setting. And I know that's something that you feel real strongly about. You work a lot on that with your clients that you work with. Give me an idea of how do you go about people listening right now? How do they set a goal? What is a goal? What are good ones? What should they be thinking right now as we get into the, we're starting to see some Masters commercials, golf fevers slowly starting to ramp up. What should they be thinking about? How should they be thinking about goals coming, into this year?
Yeah, I think whenever we look at goals, we can be pretty audacious and have these kind of these levels of expectations that are above what we can realistically accomplish. And so I think the biggest thing is just kind of understanding kind of where you're at. And I learned this a lot from you as far as kind of setting up a standard of tests just to measure and just kind of understand, hey, these are some big areas that we need to look at because either they can help us perform better or they can help us prevent against injuries. And if we want to get better, I mean, the biggest thing is don't get hurt, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the quickest way.
Generally a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just as we start to kind of establish, kind of where you're at, we go through an assessment process and just kind of understand hey, what are some certain tests or what are some certain specific movements that we need to understand where you currently are. And then from there kind of start to build out a program as far as where you want to go and then start to work backwards from it. I always joke around with a lot of my clients and kind of use, stupid movies as examples of, we don't have to get there all at once, but we have to get there, and it's a process of getting there. And so, Coming to America is one of my favorite movies. And I think, the cook is kind of explaining to Eddie Murphy, hey, you know what? I was on floors, at one point too. And then I got moved up to fries. And then after that, started making hamburgers. And I think that's how we start to kind of go through the process of hey, you know what? We need to have some mobility because we need to be able to move efficiently. And then from there, we can start to look at strength. And then from there, we can start to kind of build up speed. And we have different tests and different, tools that I end up using just to kind of determine where you're at. And then we kind of set some standards as far as, how do we get there? And what are some habits that we can attach to some of those goals that might help, push the domino that allows the next domino to fall and the next one, all of a sudden now, you're somebody who isn't, trying to get fit, but you're somebody who works out and fitness is just part of, what you currently do.
That's awesome. So what I'm hearing is to package it kind of digestibly here for everybody is step one is figure out the areas that we need to set the goals in. Once we've set those goals that are not unrealistic, then we can start to worry about the habits and the different things that we start to go after. So is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's start with goals, man. Where do you start with someone? Somebody comes into you first time, blank slate. What do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use the TPI assessment, and mainly just because it has a golf fitness handicap. And so I kind of start off with that and say like, all right, this is your golf fitness handicap, and this is where we're at. And then I'll end up using a Proteus motion, which we can look at 3D motion and really get some good numbers for you compared to people your age, your body weight. So we kind of look at you from a stability, mobility, and then we end up kind of looking at you from a speed and strength aspect. And then from there, we can start to kind of establish some goals for you based on those things of like, hey, this is where you're at. And I'll give you an example. I had a client who came in and he's a scratch golfer. And after we did his assessment, I'm like, you don't deserve to be a scratch golfer based on how you move, right? And so,
The reality's harsh.
yeah, and we kind of joke around and keep it light. But
Yeah.
usually a lot of it's kind of like, hey, you know what, you're a golfer in your 40s, mid 40s, and you're a scratch golf. And he's really kind of like a 0.5, really. But based on where you're at, you're a great golfer, right? And but your movement standards are just a little bit lower than we like to see. I mean, a lot lower than we like to see. And then when we put you on strength and speed, we kind of notice that you have kind of a low foundational movement of strength, and then also from a speed aspect. So when we start to understand, like, hey, if I'm a betting person, there's a certain period where I'm just going to stop betting on you, right? There's a time where all of a sudden age kind of catches up to us, and it's not like we lose power. What is it, like 10 yards every 10 years, right? Does that sound right?
About 10%. Yeah. That's what we've seen in all the numbers. Yeah.
So, but it's not all at once, right? It's kind of like it's not like you turn 50 and all of a sudden you're 10 miles an hour slower, right? It's basically just
wake up one morning, go to bed swinging 100, you wake up swinging 90.
Yeah, but there's certain things that kind of give us good signs as far as like, hey, you know what, you're a really good golfer, but from a range of motion aspect, we're starting to lose some range of motion, and from a strength aspect, we don't have enough foundational strength, and therefore, if we start to kind of look at motion, and one of the things that's really cool on Proteus is that we start to understand that people lose like triphasic motion or power, the quickest, right? Because we start to kind of like tighten up. It's almost like old people kind of, we add stability onto, dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, like, you could be a good candidate of somebody who's playing really well, and all of a sudden, golf is no longer fun for you anymore, or it's just really difficult. And so we start to kind of understand, like, hey, what are some goals for you? And it's as easy as looking at where are you at. Do you want to get better? Do you want to continue to play with your friends and stay on the same tee as them? If so, then we need to start to understand, like, hey, what are some step ones for you? And that could easily be like, hey, let's just kind of focus on mobility and let's clean this up. And if you're at 25 on your golf fitness handicap, let's cut that in half. In order to cut that in half, what are some of the things we need to do in order to do that? And it's like, hey, let's look at your thoracic, rotation. Let's look at your hip rotation. Look at your neck rotation. Let's look at your shoulder rotation. We can kind of clean those up. All of a sudden, now we can start to add a little bit more mobility or range of motion back to your swing. And then, then we can start to look at, hey, let's see from a power test on the Proteus, we can start to look at different numbers on there. And some of them could be, the one that's the easiest one to look at is kind of what their overall power production is. And so Proteus, what's kind of cool is it almost kind of gives you this like relative strength and speed. And so it'll have like your wattage divided by your weight, and that'll give you a goal, right? And so for most guys who I would say anybody who's 185 and above weight wise, my goal is to get them at least to a 1 to 1.
Yeah.
Usually for my juniors who are a lot lighter, it's easy. They're like at a 1.3,
right.
Just they're so light. And so we start to kind of look at some relative strength and relative numbers for them, and just start to actually put like a number to it, versus like how's your training going? Like, it's good. I feel better. And that's great. But like, how do we get, like, how can we truly assess that and have some KPIs behind that? And I think that's one of the things that I learned from you, when we first kind of worked together, and you was just establishing some numbers and saying, hey, these are some numbers that we can kind of look at, and let's beat these numbers, and let's turn it into a game and say, hey, it's not just a matter of like feeling better, but it's, if performance is our goal, then there's numbers we can track and that correlate directly to performance.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's so cool to hear that you're putting numbers to it, because that's, the research that we've done, definitely relative strength, relative power is one of the key metrics to when you're looking at longevity, not getting hurt, injury prevention, those sorts of things. And so that's really cool that you're measuring it, because I think that's everyone listening. Like, take notes. it does matter. To your point, I guess explain like what you mean when you say. I think a lot of people listening may not understand. Like you said, older people, like we add stability to dysfunction. Like what does that mean? What does that look like? How does the typical person do that? Likely, like unknowingly, like they're hurting themselves and they don't even know it. Like how does that happen? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think like probably a good example is like if I was walking on ice, how I kind of just I wouldn't walk at the same pace. I would have to kind of stiffen up, you
Yeah.
know, to create a little bit of stability. I think that's kind of an easy way of kind of looking at when we start to lose some um when we have uncontrolled motion, all of a sudden now we start to kind of stiffen up and tighten up, and all of a sudden we start to lose motion. Like another example is like, have you ever? I have some older clients in here, and whenever I talk to them, it's like they don't just turn their whole body around. It's like they have to like kind of like waddle, to get over towards me. And there's a time, it's like a period of time for them to kind of get over towards me, and I'm like, all right, if that's how you have to like move your body and orient your body just to like turn 5 degrees to look at me, how do you think that's going to happen like in a golf swing? Like what do you think is going to happen there?
Not
uh,
repeatably, I'll tell you that.
yeah, exactly. And so I think just like over time, we just start to add a little bit of dysfunction or compensation on top of things, right? And I think the easiest thing is for most people in the gym is that we tend to do things that we're good at in the gym, and so I always feel bad. And whenever I first write programs, I'm like, a lot of these things, like 80% of the stuff you're not going to like to do, and they're like, why is that? And I'm like, because you're not doing it. That's why you're here. I mean,
Yeah.
the majority of this stuff
Because you're not going to feel good about this 80% of the time.
right, yeah. It's like I have some guys, and I had this one guy, and he's like this big strong dude, and he was like you know trap bar deadlift, like 500 pounds, did a lot of CrossFit, and I'm like, you're in better shape than me. I
Yeah.
should be asking you questions right now. But the big thing about it is like a golf club isn't very heavy, right? And so all
Mhm.
of a sudden we just got to understand that like what our goal is. If it's a performance goal, then our training needs to kind of fall in line with the performance um, plan. And so, if you want to get stronger and bigger, that's good. But when we start to kind of put these goals together, I think we have to understand that there's one priority, and there's a lot of different goals that kind of help kind of tie in to get us to that area. But the hardest thing is I'll see some people and they're like, I want to get big, I want to get strong, I want to get lean, I want to get fast, and I want to prevent injury. Like, okay, that's great. Um, you know, let's figure out which one of those we want to establish first and kind of work towards that, and then we can build on that. Eventually our goal is to get you faster and stronger, right, and have you moving better. Um, but we have to kind of lay down some foundational work here first in order to get there. And so if you're getting older, I mean, one of the things is we're going to lose power, unfortunately. Um, like I remember hearing this podcast on Mike Boyle, and he was kind of talking about how he had the women's Olympic volleyball team in, and he had some clients who were there, and they're like, Mike, we're upset with you. He's like, what's the matter? And he's like, we've been training you with you for years, and like we don't have butts like that. And he's like, all right, well, like when was the last time
That's hilarious.
when was the last time you were like sprinting and jumping? And they're like, oh, probably like in our like mid 20s. And it was kind of interesting because I started to think about that, and I was like, usually like once you start to have kids, they steal your life, really. Um, once you do, like all of a sudden, a lot of the
I
recreation.
have three. I can attest to
Exactly.
that.
I have a puppy, and he's just hijacked our whole entire family's time right now, and it's insane. But you start to kind of lose out on some of these recreational sports that you played, where you were kind of jumping, sprinting, moving fast, doing things that are pretty powerful, right? Um, and then that starts to then show up in training, and that we're not doing like any kind of jumps, or we're not moving as fast as we could. And over time, that's how we kind of end up where we're at. And that's kind of usually what I end up telling people is that like, hey, what got you here won't get you there, and that a lot of the skill and performance you had was great. You still have skill, and that's why you're still a good golfer. It's just the performance side of things is starting to kind of drift a little bit. And if we don't bring that back up to a good standard, then all of a sudden you might compensate with some of the things you do from a skill standpoint. And so, I think a lot of it is just kind of tying in a lot of those different things with people and just kind of understanding like, hey, I got some clients that are like these high achievers, and I'm like, and it's great. Like your ego kind of put you in position to accomplish a lot of things,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't think we need to set, you keep your ego, because that's going to allow you to then continue to set some good standards and for fitness. It's just that certain things we need to put aside and just kind of understand that, like, you're not going to work through back pain. Like maybe we need to do some mobility drills first. Or maybe we need to, kind of do some resets and kind of get your body, primed before you end up going and working out and trying to, not hit PRs on every single workout. And the stack system is great because, it's like a game. It's like, all right, this is my number, let me beat it. And that's great. But instead of trying to hit PRs, I think sometimes we need to develop, work on more of the development part of it, of strength and speed and mobility and just good movement overall. And I know this is a little bit all over the place, which kind of ties into some goal setting. But I think the biggest thing is just trying to have a clear vision for where you want to go,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
kind of knowing that like, hey, like I need to have like some margins that kind of keep me within me being hurt and me being able to achieve my goals, and just kind of knowing that like, hey, this is a busy season for me, like maybe I need to kind of adjust appropriately, or just kind of know that like, hey, I wanted to get here in 8 weeks, maybe it's going to take me 12 to 16, and that's
Right.
perfectly fine as long as you get there and continue to work towards it. But I think sometimes it's like, hey, in the first 2 weeks didn't go how I had it planned, and now I'm going to compensate by like pushing through it and doubling up on my workouts for the next 2 weeks to make
Then,
up for time.
then you're sore, and then you skip workouts, and
Yeah,
then yeah,
and you're like, you might be worse than you when you started off.
exactly. So if we take, I mean, you've given a great like overview of everything. Like if we took, I don't know, let's take a 60-year-old golfer who comes in. Let's say their mobility you evaluate them. Let's say their mobility sucks, right? Like, what's an example of a goal and how you'd help them set for like just improving? I don't know. Pick a joint that you see a lot. I don't know. Let's say that joint sucks. What's one goal? Like, how would you help that client set that goal? Because I know just from all the golfers we work with, pretty much 9.5 out of 10 people listening right now are going to fail something mobility wise. So how would we set that goal for them coming into this year?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I have output, which basically it has like a goniometer on it, and you can end up kind of putting it on and just kind of looking at what someone's range of motion is. So a lot of times we'll just kind of get a good like eye view of like where that's at, and then we can actually just put that on and say, hey, you know what, you're at 12.
Okay. Yeah.
And just kind of saying like, okay, what are some things that might have gotten you to a 12, if you had good mobility before. And so if they do a lot of things like, sitting down at a desk, I'll kind of tell them like, hey, these are bad examples, but I use them. So I'll tell you, but I'm like, hey, think of yourself like a smoker when you're at work. Like you got to go take a smoke break every, 45 minutes. And so set alarm or something on your phone where basically you're just kind of moving a little bit more and not just kind of being in just a seated position all the time. And that could easily be from like, going from like a standing desk or just kind of like walking around a little bit, or maybe even in that, you're a professional sitter. So maybe like for 15 minutes or for 5 minutes, we can carve out some time and just do some mobility drills, like some cars, or you can get a lacrosse ball and kind of like, work on some soft tissue stuff in between, meetings if you needed to. And I think those are some easy kind of low hanging fruit that you can end up, going after. But I think as we kind of look at low hanging fruit, we got to like identify, like, let's put you under the right tree first.
Right.
And then let's see like, what are some simple things we can do? And then we can also look at some from a hip mobility and just kind of understand like certain muscles that help kind of, would help assist with that. So like I think of like obliques are always great in kind of working on some like cross connect rolls and like doing some resets, just to kind of help out with alignment and position, and then from there that's going to help make some of that mobility change a little bit easier. And so kind of stacking on some activation work with some mobility drills or some breathing drills.
Yeah.
You know,
So are
it all-
those low hanging fruits? Is that like the beginning of the habit creation?
I,
Like how do you transition from like, hey, So they come in, they see you, they get their golf fitness score. Let's say their hips suck, right? So you're all right. We're setting a goal on the hip. You mentioned some low hanging fruit. How do we then transition to, I think you said let's say they're at a 12. I'm assuming you set a goal of whatever the number is objectively, so that it's not just feel. But then where does that transition to, like, let's start building a habit? Like, let's accomplish this goal. Is that a lot of like the low hanging fruit stuff that you're talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. So, so I use an app. So basically, the majority of people that end up coming to see me. Sorry, you can hear my dog barking right there.
Oh, you're fine. We're a dog friendly podcast.
He is a terrorist right now in our family. Usually, so when someone comes and sees me, a lot of the clients I end up kind of working with are a little bit of a hybrid model.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come in, we end up kind of going through their assessment process, and then we set up goals, and then basically I give them a plan. And basically, as we kind of go through that plan, a lot of it's just kind of asking them questions and just trying to understand like what's realistic for them, right? And so I'll say like, hey, like how much time do we have? Like, oh, I can do 45 minutes every single day. And I'm like, hey, let's out of 45 minutes, how confident do you feel like you could achieve that? And they're like, yeah, probably like an 8. And I'm like, what if we did 30 minutes? You think you could be a 10? Perfect. Like, you can be a 10. Perfect. And then from there, it's just kind of understanding like, what can I easily commit to and start to knock out as far as like, hey, if this is my main goal, let me just do like, at least 10 minutes every single day of hip mobility. And like I said, a lot of it's just trying to establish like, let's put you under the right tree and then understand that like, hey, this is an issue for you. And then let's give you some easy drills. And some of those easy drills just might be like, let's test, see what changes occurred, and then retest and kind of know like, hey, if you do this, this hopefully will be your outcome, in a month from now. And so we kind of give them some different drills just so they can have a little bit more of a buy-in and kind of believe like, hey, I can actually change this and improve it. And therefore, like, let me just kind of knock out, 10 minutes. And a lot of times, it is more of like, hey, our goal would be to like improve your whole entire golf fitness handicap and get you to cut that in half. But if you have really bad hips and a really bad thoracic spine and your back is hurting all the time, let's do, 20 minutes. We can commit to that at least 3 days, 3 days out of the week. I mean, our goal is to do more. Well, if that's our starting point, then that's our starting point.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure then you stack the little wins, and then the little wins equal big wins. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, I heard this podcast and it was kind of like, there's a certain point, like you're going to either be like, for my juniors, it's kind of like Tiger Woods. And it's like, all right, like, let's go and be aggressive and be strong and powerful. Mm-hmm. And that's going to get you to the next stage of your, performance. And for some of my like older clients, like I'm kind of like, hey, we're like Michael Jordan with the fadeaway right now. Like, we're just trying to make some adjustment, right, to our game. Yeah. And we're not, it doesn't mean that we have to be like, 360 dunking on people and putting our finger in their face. But like, it could easily just be like, hey, this is the next phase of my training and it's going to be focused more on mobility. And that might end up being like, hey, let me do some stretching before I go and hit balls, like, or hit balls. And I have a lot of clients that are using the stack system, which is great because it kind of forces you to take time and it graphs everything. And it's like this game. But I'm like, hey, that's just like a workout, and there's stress that's going to be applied to your body. So like, let's just kind of know that, there's always in golf, there's some offsets that we need to kind of understand, and so this is one of the offsets to some of the stress that you're going to apply to your body. And if we're going to be swinging as fast as we can, let's do some things that might either prep us or help us kind of speed up that recovery process a little bit sooner. And then, hip mobility is our goal. Let's just make sure that we're not tightening our hips up because we're swinging, out of our shoes. Yeah. And so, a lot of it's just kind of like, I think more than anything else, what you do really great is, in collecting all the data is like, this is our feedback, but I think a lot of times, in being able to accomplish goals, it's like, what's our feed forward? Like, what's, like, how can I build on top of all these things? And I think a lot of it's kind of like, hey, let's test, retest. Let's figure out like, what are some things that you like to do? And let's incorporate some of those and kind of have that with a little bit more of an emphasis on positions that might end up incorporating more hip mobility. So like if you like doing chops, let's do chops from like a half kneeling position. And so like, as we start to kind of look at programming different things, like there's lots of different ways, just like as like, we can get them to eat some vegetables with, sneaking it in there.
Harder than you'd think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. I mean, so basically, to summarize, it sounds like step one is figure out where, the analogy you use is, which tree do you need to be under, right? What's the tree that that we start with? Where are the issues? And then look at starting to set some goals, that are obviously measurable. It sounds like you do a ton of measuring and data, which I love. Obviously, I'm a geek. We are one in spirit. And then really, it sounds like you mentioned the low hanging fruit and kind of setting those goals. And even if, like, to your point, like, start stacking those goals, shorter, smaller, get them the smaller wins and those stack to the bigger ones. So that's awesome. So hopefully, all of you guys listening, like take this to heart, but maybe go back, re-listen to this one more time and have your notebooks out, take some notes. Cause I think this is so important as we, go in starting any program, regardless of time of the year, whether it's off season, if it's in season, and you're going to continue to readjust. And, once you hit a goal, set the next one, right. And continue to move those forward and move your career forward. And I think I loved the other kind of nugget that you dropped was, you're not, when you're 65, your goal is going to be a little different than when you're 16 in terms of, what sort of, I think you used the basketball analogy, are you 360 dunking, or you just trying to, maybe, not something a little less aggressive, but, still impressive and still effective. So, Jonathan, I can't thank you enough for being on the pod today. Where can people follow you, keep up with you, if get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you at Athletic Golf Fitness?
I think right now I'm probably most on Instagram. So if you just go to Athletic Golf Fitness on Instagram, you'll find a lot of my posts and information there. So
awesome, man.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
Cool. Yeah, man. No, appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have you on again. As we get in later into the year, and like I said in the beginning of the pod, it's just always awesome to hang out with you. Just honored to have you on the show, and thanks so much for being here with us. And for everyone listening, thanks so much for hanging out with us, giving us your time. Hopefully, Jonathan was able to diffuse a few bombs for you in terms of wasting your time this beginning of the year. Set goals the right way, accomplish them, stack those little wins, and let's have a great season as we go into the new year. So thanks again for everyone hanging out with us, and we'll see you on the next episode.